The Battle of Cannae, fought on August 2nd, 216 BC during the Second Punic War, is remembered as one of the most devastating defeats in Roman history and a masterpiece of military tactics. Confronted by the vast power of Rome, Hannibal Barca of Carthage sought not only to defeat Roman armies in the field, but to break the alliance system that underpinned their strength. The Roman Republic, determined to crush Hannibal once and for all, assembled one of its largest armies, around 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. Hannibal, fielding a smaller force of roughly 50,000 men, arranged his lines in a deliberate crescent formation, placing his weaker Gallic and Iberian infantry in the center and his seasoned African troops on the flanks. As the Romans pressed forward, his center slowly gave way, drawing them inward. At the critical moment, the African infantry pivoted and attacked from both sides, while Hannibal's cavalry overwhelmed Roman horsemen and struck from the rear. The result was catastrophic for Rome. Tens of thousands of soldiers were killed or captured in one of the bloodiest single days of ancient warfare. Yet despite its scale, the victory did not alter the strategic outcome of the war. Although 50,000 to 70,000 soldiers died that day, Rome adapted and eventually recovered its dominance. The Battle of Gaugamela, fought on October 1st, 331 BC, marked the defining clash between Alexander the Great of Macedonia and Darius III of Persia. Sometimes referred to as the Battle of Arbela, it was a turning point that ended Persian supremacy in the ancient world and secured Alexander's rise as the master of Asia. The conflict had its roots in the long-standing Macedonian ambition to conquer the Persian Empire. After multiple victories, Alexander advanced steadily east, claiming Egypt before pressing toward Mesopotamia. Darius, determined to halt him, gathered a massive army on the plains near Gaugamela, relying on cavalry, scythe chariots, and sheer numbers to overwhelm the smaller Macedonian force. Alexander, leading about 47,000 men, countered with disciplined formations and tactical innovation. He extended his right flank to draw the Persians out of position, then led a decisive cavalry charge into the gap that opened in their lines. Meanwhile, his infantry phalanx advanced steadily, while light troops neutralized the Persian chariots before they could break the line. Darius, once again confronted by Alexander's audacity, fled the battlefield, abandoning his army. The result was a crushing Macedonian victory. Persia's forces scattered, its nobles turned against Darius, and the great empire quickly unraveled. Alexander entered Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, seizing vast wealth and proclaiming himself the ruler of Asia. The Battle of the Catalaunian Plains, fought in 451 near Chalon in Gaul, was one of the most dramatic encounters of late antiquity and a defining moment in the struggle against Attila the Hun. Known as the Battle of Chalon, it brought together an unlikely coalition of Romans, Visigoths, and other Germanic tribes against the formidable Hunnic horde, halting Attila's westward expansion into Europe. By the mid-5th century, the Western Roman Empire was weakened by internal decline and political instability. Attila, commanding a vast army of Huns and allied tribes, sought to exploit this weakness by invading Gaul. His campaign threatened to overwhelm the fractured provinces of the empire. Roman general Flavius Aetius, however, forged alliances with the Visigoths under King Theodoric I and other tribal leaders, rallying a combined force to meet the invaders. The battle unfolded on uneven ground that blunted the full advantage of Hunnic cavalry. Fierce fighting raged throughout the day, while Attila's horse archers unleashed devastating volleys, while the coalition pressed to hold the high ground. Theodoric I was killed in the clash, but his son Thorismund rallied the Visigoths, preventing the coalition's collapse. Attila eventually withdrew, constructing a defensive wagon fort as his battered army retreated from the field. Though there were between 165 to 300,000 casualties, the outcome was a strategic victory for Rome and its allies. The aura of Hunnic invincibility was broken, and Attila's advance into Western Europe was decisively checked. Now, before we continue, I have something that I need to tell you guys. When I was a kid, on the 4th of July of all days, I was hit by a car. Fireworks, barbecue, and then bam, a trip to the hospital. Thankfully, I recovered, but for my parents, it was a nightmare, especially because of the insurance companies and them having to deal with the mountain of medical bills. And that's the reality for so many other people as well. Traditional personal injury claims are designed to wear you down. Insurance companies drag their feet, offer you pennies to what you deserve, and hope you'll just give up. That's why I wish my parents had known about Morgan & Morgan. There's a reason history remembers those who fought for justice, just like there's a reason why Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. And for over 35 years, they've been fighting for the people, not the insurance companies. Their results are insane. In Florida, one client was offered just $350,000, but Morgan & Morgan fought for them and got them over $12 million. In Pennsylvania, another client was awarded $26 million, which was 40 times higher than what the insurer wanted to pay. That's because when you hire Morgan & Morgan, it's like hiring a legal army. They've got over 1,000 attorneys and 100 plus offices nationwide, and they've recovered over $25 billion for over 500,000 clients. And the best part, there are no upfront costs. Their fee is free unless they win. Submitting a claim is super easy. You can start in less than a minute with no endless appointments, overwhelming paperwork, or long waits. So if you're ever injured, don't settle for less and let the insurance companies win. You can just click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to get started with Morgan & Morgan today. The Battle of Talas, fought in 751 near the Talas River in Central Asia, was a decisive encounter between the Abbasid Caliphate and the Tang dynasty of China. The conflict arose from local rivalries between the kingdoms of Fergana and Chach. When Fergana called upon Tang assistance, the Chinese intervened and executed the ruler of Chach, despite promising safe passage. His son sought support from the Abbasids, who were then expanding eastward under the leadership of Abu Muslim, governor of Khorasan. Ziyad ibn Salah, an experienced commander, led the Muslim army, bolstered by Turkic armies such as the Karluks, while the Tang forces marched west under General Gao Xianji. The battle lasted several days, with Muslim accounts speaking of 100,000 Chinese troops, while Chinese records suggested far fewer. The turning point came when the Karluk Turks attacked the Chinese from the rear, shattering their formations. Caught between disciplined Abbasid forces and the Karluks, the Tang army collapsed, suffering heavy losses before retreating east. With around 40 to 50,000 casualties, the victory secured Abbasid dominance in Central Asia and permanently ended Chinese expansion into the region. In the aftermath, Islam spread rapidly across Transoxiana, reshaping its cultural identity. The Battle of Borodino, fought on September 7, 1812, was the largest and bloodiest single-day clash of the Napoleonic Wars, pitting Napoleon's Grande Armée against the Russian Empire under General Mikhail Kutuzov. Taking place just 75 miles west of Moscow, it became the climactic encounter of the French invasion of Russia and a turning point in Napoleon's ill-fated campaign. Napoleon's decision to invade Russia stemmed from growing tensions with Tsar Alexander I, specifically over Russia's withdrawal from the continental system, the trade blockade against Britain. After advancing deep into Russian territory, Napoleon sought a decisive battle to force the Russians into submission. The Russians, having retreated and scorched their own land, finally chose to stand and fight near Borodino with some 150,000 men against Napoleon's 128,000. The fighting was ferocious and relentless. Napoleon launched repeated frontal assaults on Russian fortifications, such as the Bagration Fletches and the Great Redoubt, where casualties soared on both sides. Despite local successes, the French failed to deliver a knockout blow. Kutuzov's troops, battered but unbroken, retreated in good order by nightfall, leaving the French technically in control of the field, but too weakened to capitalize on their costly victory. Casualties reached staggering levels, with estimates of 70 to 80,000 dead and wounded combined. Though Napoleon could claim a tactical win, strategically it was hollow. The Russian army survived, Moscow was abandoned and burned, and the Grande Armée soon faced the devastating retreat that sealed Napoleon's downfall. The Battle of Leipzig, fought from October 16th to 19th, 1813, was the largest engagement of the Napoleonic Wars in one of the most decisive battles in European history. Known as the Battle of the Nations, it marked the moment when Napoleon Bonaparte's dominance of the continent began to collapse. The roots of the conflict lay in Napoleon's disastrous 1812 invasion of Russia, which destroyed much of his Grande Armée and emboldened his enemies. By 1813, a coalition of Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Sweden formed the Sixth Coalition, determined to drive France out of Central Europe. Despite raising a new army, Napoleon faced inexperienced conscripts and wavering allies, while his opponents were united under the Trachenberg Plan, designed to avoid direct confrontation with him and instead overwhelm its marshals. The battle unfolded around the city of Leipzig, with over 500,000 soldiers engaged, making it the largest battle in Europe prior to World War I. Napoleon initially fought with his usual brilliance, repelling coalition assaults at Wachau and Liebertwolkwitz. Yet as days passed, the overwhelming numbers of the Allies, bolstered by the defection of Saxon troops from Napoleon's side, gradually encircled his army. On October 18th, the coalition launched a massive coordinated assault, forcing Napoleon into retreat. A catastrophic error during the demolition of a bridge across the Elster River trapped thousands of French troops, leading to massive losses. With around 100,000 casualties, the consequences were immense. Napoleon's defeat dissolved the Confederation of the Rhine and ended French control east of the Rhine. The coalition pressed its advantage, invading France and forcing Napoleon to accept defeat in 1814. The Battle of Gettysburg, fought from July 1st to 3rd, 1863, was the bloodiest and most decisive clash of the American Civil War. The road to Gettysburg began after Confederate General Robert E. Lee's stunning victory at Chancellorsville in May 1863. Hoping to carry the war into Union territory, relieve pressure on Virginia, and possibly force Northern leaders to negotiate peace, Lee marched north with the Army of Northern Virginia. In response, newly appointed Union commander George G. Meade moved the Army of the Potomac to intercept. The two forces collided unexpectedly at the small town of Gettysburg. The three-day battle unfolded in dramatic phases. On July 1st, Confederate forces overwhelmed Union troops and pushed them through the town to strong defensive positions on Cemetery Hill and Ridge. On July 2nd, Lee launched massive assaults on the Union flanks, resulting in brutal fighting at Little Round Top, the Wheatfield, and Devil's Den. Though costly, Union defenders held firm. On July 3rd, Lee gambled on a frontal assault, known as Pickett's Charge, sending 12,000 men across open fields against fortified Union lines. The attack failed disastrously, inflicting staggering Confederate losses and forcing Lee to retreat southward. The consequences were immense. Union casualties numbered about 23,000, while the Confederates suffered roughly 28,000, crippling losses Lee could not replace. Gettysburg halted Confederate momentum, shattered Lee's aura of invincibility, and bolstered Northern morale. The Battle of Sedan, fought on September 1st to 2nd, 1870, was the decisive clash of the Franco-Prussian War. It marked the downfall of Emperor Napoleon III, the collapse of the Second French Empire, and the rise of a united Germany under Prussian leadership. The background to Sedan lay in France's growing unease at Prussia's expanding power after victories against Denmark and Austria. When tensions over the Spanish succession crisis erupted, Napoleon III declared war on Prussia in July 1870. The French hoped for a swift, morale-boosting victory, but instead suffered defeats at Worth, Spicheren, and Gravelotte. As Marshal Patrice de MacMahon led the French army of Chalon northward in an attempt to relieve the besieged army of the Rhine at Metz, Prussians under Helmuth von Moltke cut him off and forced him toward the fortress town of Sedan. On September 1st, German forces from the 3rd and 4th Armies encircled Sedan, unleashing relentless artillery bombardments. MacMahon was wounded early, and command passed through a chaotic chain of generals. French attempts to break out, such as the desperate cavalry charge, led by General Marguerite, were crushed by concentrated German fire. By September 2nd, the French army trapped in the Moose Trap accepted defeat. Over 100,000 French soldiers, along with Napoleon III himself, were taken prisoner. France lost its emperor and its main field army, while Prussia secured the upper hand in the war. Within days, the French Empire collapsed and the Third Republic was proclaimed. The Battle of the Somme, fought between July 1st and November 18, 1916, stands as one of the most infamous and devastating battles of World War I. The origins of the battle lay in the Allied strategy of launching coordinated offensives across multiple fronts to overwhelm the Central Powers. Initially conceived as a largely French-led attack, the plan shifted when the Germans launched their massive assault at Verdun in February 1916. With French resources tied down, the British Expeditionary Force under General Douglas Haig assumed the primary role in the Somme offensive, supported by French forces under General Joseph Joffre. The battle began on July 1st, with one of the heaviest artillery barrages in history, followed by waves of infantry advancing across no man's land. The bombardment failed to destroy German defenses, and the first day became the bloodiest in British military history, with nearly 60,000 casualties. Despite the horrific losses, fighting dragged on for months as the Allies attempted to wear down the Germans through repeated assaults. New technologies, including the first use of tanks in September, made their debut but had limited impact. By its end, the Allies advanced roughly 10 kilometers, but at a staggering cost. Over 1 million men killed, wounded, or missing on both sides. While tactically inconclusive, the battle weakened the German army and demonstrated the skill of modern industrialized war. The Battle of Verdun, fought from February 21st to December 18, 1916, was the longest and one of the bloodiest battles of World War I. The German Chief of Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, initiated the offensive with the aim of bleeding France white by forcing it to defend a location of immense national pride. Verdun, with its centuries-old fortifications and strategic importance, was chosen deliberately. German Crown Prince Wilhelm led the Fifth Army against the French Second Army, commanded first by General Fernand de Langle and later by Philippe Pétain. The Germans sought to capture the Meuse Heights, forcing the French into costly counterattacks. The battle opened with an unprecedented artillery bombardment, followed by infantry advances that quickly captured Fort Douaumont. However, French counterattacks under Pétain's command stiffened resistance. The fighting turned into a war of attrition, with the French rallying around the cry, "They shall not pass." Fort Vaux fell in June, but subsequent German pushes stalled. By July, with resources directed to the Somme and Russian fronts, the German advance faltered. French counteroffensives later in the year recaptured Douaumont and much of the lost ground. By the battle's end, French casualties numbered around 377,000, and German losses about 337,000, making Verdun a human catastrophe. Yet France emerged with a symbolic victory, halting German ambitions and strengthening national morale. The Brusilov offensive, fought from June 4th to September 20th, 1916, was the Russian Empire's most significant military operation of World War I, and one of the deadliest offensives in history. The offensive was launched under the framework of the Chantilly Agreement, in which Allied powers pledged to coordinate summer offensives against the Central Powers. France, reeling from the Battle of Verdun, pressed Russia to strike in order to relieve pressure. Brusilov, commanding the southwestern front, proposed a bold plan targeting Austro-Hungarian lines in Galicia. Despite skepticism from Russian high command and limited reinforcements, he insisted on using innovative tactics to maximize surprise. On June 4th, the attack began with carefully planned artillery barrages and infiltration-style assault along a broad front. Instead of relying on massed frontal charges, Brusilov deployed smaller, specialized units to exploit weak points in enemy defenses. Within days, Russian forces broke through the Austro-Hungarian Fourth Army, driving deep into Galicia. The scale of collapse was catastrophic for Austria-Hungary, which lost nearly 500,000 men, many as prisoners, and had to rely heavily on German reinforcements. Although initially successful, the offensive slowed by late summer due to Russia's staggering casualties, inadequate logistics, and lack of support from other Russian commanders. By its end, Russia had suffered over 1 million losses. The Battle of Stalingrad, fought from July 17, 1942 to February 2, 1943, stands as one of the deadliest and most decisive battles in human history. By mid-1942, Hitler sought to seize Stalingrad, both for its industrial capacity and its symbolic value as the city bearing Joseph Stalin's name. German forces, specifically the Sixth Army, under General Friedrich Paulus, aimed to secure the Volga River and advance toward the oil-rich Caucasus. The Soviets, under commanders Georgy Zhukov, Vasily Chuikov, and others, prepared to defend the city at all cost. The battle unfolded with massive German bombardments that reduced much of Stalingrad to rubble. Street-to-street and even room-to-room fighting characterized the struggle, with Soviet defenders famously clinging to every block along the Volga. Despite initial German gains, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus in November 1942, encircling the Sixth Army by striking at its vulnerable Romanian flanks. Hitler forbade retreat, and attempts to resupply the trapped army by air proved disastrous. After months of starvation and relentless Soviet assaults, Paulus finally surrendered in February 1943, with over 90,000 Axis soldiers taken prisoner. With around 2 million casualties, Germany lost an entire army, while Soviet morale soared. The defeat ended German advances into the Soviet Union and shifted momentum irreversibly toward the Allies. The Battle of Moscow, fought between October 2, 1941 and January 7, 1942, was a critical turning point on the Eastern Front of World War II. It marked the first major failure of Hitler's Operation Barbarossa and demonstrated the resilience of Soviet defenses. After the rapid German advance towards Soviet territory in summer 1941, Moscow became the ultimate objective. Operation Typhoon, launched by Army Group Center, sought to encircle the Soviet capital with a massive pincer movement from the north and south. The German High Command believed the city's fall would cripple the Soviet Union politically and militarily. Initial German offensives captured Vyazma and Bryansk, trapping hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers. Yet the advance soon slowed under harsh autumn rains, logistical breakdowns, and fierce Soviet counterattacks. By November, German forces were within sight of Moscow, with some units only 30 kilometers from the Kremlin. However, the brutal Russian winter, combined with the arrival of fresh Soviet troops, halted the offensive. On December 5th, the Red Army launched a massive counteroffensive, pushing the Germans back 100 to 250 kilometers from the capital. The outcome was a decisive Soviet victory, ending hopes for a quick German conquest. It cost both sides dearly. The Soviets suffered over 1 million casualties, while German losses reached nearly 200,000. The Siege of Leningrad, lasting from September 8, 1941 to January 27, 1944, was one of the longest and most devastating blockades in military history. Stretching 872 days, it became a symbol of Soviet endurance during World War II. Following the launch of Operation Barbarossa, Germany's Army Group North advanced toward Leningrad, while Finnish forces closed in from the north. Hitler viewed the city as both a strategic target and a symbol of Bolshevik ideology. Rather than storming Leningrad directly, German High Command chose to starve it into submission, cutting off land routes and bombarding the city. By September 1941, the last rail link was severed, and over 3 million inhabitants found themselves trapped. Inside the city, life quickly descended into desperation. Food rations dropped to starvation levels, and the brutal winter of 1941 and 42 claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Despite the suffering, the Soviet Baltic Fleet, anti-aircraft defenses, and civilians, many of whom dug trenches and built barricades, held the line. The Soviets launched multiple offensives to break the blockade, finally opening a narrow land corridor in January 1943. Yet it was only a year later, in January 1944, that the Red Army completely lifted the siege, driving Axis forces 100 kilometers away. The toll was catastrophic. Over 1 million civilians and soldiers perished. mostly from starvation and bombardment, yet the survival of Leningrad became a powerful symbol of Soviet resistance. The Battle of Berlin, fought from April 16th to May 2nd, 1945, was the climatic final offensive of World War II in Europe. By early 1945, Germany was collapsing under relentless Allied pressure. In the east, the Soviet Red Army had driven through Poland during the Vistula Order offensive, halting only 60 kilometers from Berlin. Hitler, refusing to abandon the city, ordered a last-ditch defense under Operation Clausewitz. The defenders included exhausted Wehrmacht divisions, Waffen-SS units, Volkssturm militias, and even Hitler Youth. Facing them were over 2 million Soviet troops, led by Marshals Georgy Zhukov, Ivan Konev, and Konstantin Rokossovsky. The Soviets began their assault at the Silo Heights on April 16th, where Zhukov's first Belarusian front broke through after days of brutal combat. Konev's first Ukrainian front pushed from the south, quickly encircling Berlin. By April 20th, Hitler's final birthday, Soviet artillery was shelling the city center. Fierce street-by-street fighting followed as German forces, vastly outnumbered, resisted with desperation. In the Führer bunker, Hitler acknowledged defeat. On April 30th, he took his own life. On May 2nd, General Helmuth Weidling surrendered the city. Casualties were immense. Around 80,000 Soviet soldiers died, while German military losses reached nearly 100,000, with hundreds of thousands more captured. The legacy of the battle is monumental. Berlin's fall marked the definitive collapse of the Third Reich and the end of World War II in Europe. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you learned something, make sure to leave a like. Comment down below your thoughts on any of the battles I discussed in this video, and subscribe if you would like to see a part 2 or more videos like this one. Thank you again, and goodbye.